evening, everyone, and welcome to this Emerging Writers Festival digital event, Lullaby. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations and traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay respects to the elders past and present and to the elders of the lands which this recording might reach. I hope you're all ready to settle in for some excellent storytelling. We have six, can I count? 6 or 7 fairy tale retellings. And I am Olivia Muscat. I should have said that earlier. And I am going to be reading for you first from a story that I like to call, it's excerpts from the Fairy Godmother's inbox. Hi, Miss Godmother. Firstly, I love your column. I steal it from the newspaper every morning. The witch makes me read her the classifieds while I paint her nails. Gross. Yeah, I'm stuck living with a witch, and not an awesome, sorcery, witchy vibes, cool spells witch. Just a garden variety, pointy hat wearing, gingerbread house dwelling witch who makes me listen to her sing jazz standards and play Battleship with her while she's fattening up my brother in a cage somewhere. I have to write this quickly so she doesn't catch me out. Basically, the dilemma is my brother is useless, my stepmother is evil, and my father is weak. Pretty standard around these parts for some reason. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that my father just went along with that abusive woman's plan to leave my brother and I to die in a forest somewhere. If we leave them there, they'll never find their way out and we won't have to feed them anymore. Okay, honey, if that's what you want. I might miss them a bit, but I guess it makes sense. Honestly, they deserve each other. Then we survived the forest, thanks to me. But of course, my brother couldn't resist pigging out on the toffee windows. I get it, he was hungry, but Rumpelstiltskin, it couldn't have been more obviously a trap if it had "This is not a trap" painted in strawberry icing on the front door. To give my brother some credit, he's managed to put the witch off long enough to give me time to form a plan, but since he got us into this mess, that's the least he can do. My question to you, Miss G, is whether or not I should cut my losses and leave him here. Make a new life for myself where I never have to deal with anyone's crap, play Battleship, or listen to tone-deaf renditions of the Chattanooga Choo-Choo ever again, or should I do the honourable thing and save my whiny, greedy, gullible brother's skinny butt? Advice much appreciated. Sincerely yours, I Hate Candy. Hey, FG. I was wondering if you have any advice about how to take credit for something awesome you've done, or maybe how to change people's impressions of you. So recently, I got into an altercation with this wolf who had been terrorizing my village, trampling flowers, stealing pies, eating people. You get the gist. I was visiting my grandmother, and this wolf was just lying in her bed, wearing her clothes, trying to convince me that he was her. No, I can't see fantastically, but I can recognize my own grandmother's voice. He'd obviously eaten her, which sad, but she was kind of a spiteful old hag. So anyway, I was sure as shit not going to let the asshole make me his next victim, so I snuck around the back and got him with the cake knife. Anyway, the story going round the small-minded gossips in my village is that some handsome, strong, brave hunter woodcutter type came along and saved me from the wolf. Literally, no. My cloak was stained red with its blood. And no matter how much I insist it was all me, they refuse to believe me capable of such a thing. Just because I'm a girl? Just because I like baking and picking flowers in the woods? Because I have a disability? Like I said, small-minded. I can't wait to get out of this self-forsaken place. How do I make them see me as more than the helpless girl with the dodgy vision, pretty plaits, and sad mother? Thanks in advance, Girl in the Hood. Hi, I have a problem. So I live with my 6 brothers, and usually everything's fine. They were pretty harmless and let me do my own thing, but recently this chick just shows up. She came into our house and moved my stuff and cleaned up, and now my brothers are fawning over her like she's some sort of angel. No, she's a criminal. And they've bought her sob story about, oh, the Queen tried to kill me, blah, blah, blah. I have nowhere to go, blah, blah, blah. I want her out of my house. And if that weren't bad enough, now my brothers are comparing me to her. You're a girl. Why aren't you pretty like her? Why don't you cook and clean like her? You should be looking after us. Why don't you do your hair nice like she does? I don't think so. Just because I don't swan around in flimsy impractical dresses and go around cleaning up after their dopey, happy, sleepy, sneezy asses while goddamn singing about it doesn't make me any less of a woman. How do I get them to see that this so-called princess is probably a fraud? And even more importantly, how do I let them know that their patriarchal, misogynistic fairy dung won't fly with me? Should I just move out? Thanks. Not grumpy, just sick of bullshit. Dearest Miss Fairy G, I found myself in a bit of a pickle. A few days ago, I was just minding my own business, reading and walking as you do. It was my lunch break. I wasn't necessarily looking where I was going, and I fell in some mud. It was a true crime biography, and I was getting to the juicy bits. I didn't realize how far I'd walked, and it was getting pretty dark. I was cold, wet, hungry, and really, really, really sore. My body was almost too tired to move. I saw some light in the distance, and I knew there was a castle somewhere in the area. And I thought it might be a good place to dry off and reorient myself. But now I'm trapped. This queen person gave me dry clothes and a cup of Milo, and then when I tried to leave, she insisted I stay the night on the most uncomfortable bed you've ever laid your bum on. I've still got bruises. And me being me, I made the mistake of telling the waiter who served me breakfast, and now they all won't stop making a fuss of me, carrying on about how I must be the worthy princess because only one with the delicate constitution of a princess could have her sleep disturbed by such a teeny weeny pea. I'm not delicate. That mattress was shonky and obviously hadn't been slept on in like 100 years. And I've got rheumatoid arthritis. I'm pretty much always sore. I keep telling them that I'm definitely no princess, but they insist that I'm the one. The princess fated to marry this weedy, whiny, boring, mansplaining prince that they just pulled out of nowhere. I've kindly explained that I'm already in a relationship and my girlfriend will probably be worrying about me if I don't get home soon. And I even tried just leaving. But they've stuck me with a 24-hour guard. They won't let me go. They've announced my engagement to the royal court. They bought fabric for my wedding dress. Help! Any tips? Or maybe could you get in contact with someone who might be able to boost me out of here? Thanks. Pee in the bed. Thank you. That was me, my piece. And now, next up, we have Mariana Salem. Mariana Salem is a proud Wonnarua and Lebanese-Australian critic, teacher, communications graduate, and writer. You can find her around social media at aka Just Mary and her other writings in Junkie, Kill Your Darlings, and The Big Issue. Aside from being addicted to film and television, she also co-hosts a podcast called Gay V Club, where she critically gushes about queer media. But mostly, she hopes you ate something nice today. Please welcome her.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to read a piece today called The Fairy Tale Thief. Doraroo estimated that it took them about a decade to realize that they were immortal, but in their defense, they'd been busy. They couldn't remember what with exactly, life assuredly, perhaps parties, books, and gardens overgrowing with heartache, highs, and forgotten afternoons. One takes little notice of life's everyday forward march until it goes on longer than expected. Dora supposed they noticed when their friends began to question Dora's unwaning interest in their interests. The books, plays, fairy tales, and stories of Dora's quote-unquote youth still reveled in their mind's eye every night. Meanwhile, Dora's friends lacked the time for such obsessions, even when their passion remained. The ticking clock the ticking clock's call of husbands, wives, illness, and old age eventually drowned out the tale's alluring whisper. There was also the whole thing where Dora didn't age, of course, at least not in any way that counted, to those who might ask them for a pen, purchase their wares, or swipe right on a dating app. Dora didn't know how it happened. Perhaps Mr. Wilde's imaginary theory had merit once. But the self-portrait from which he had borrowed so much inspiration had been no match for centuries of oxygen and had vanished long ago. Still, it was a nice sentiment. Others had their theories over the years too. Dora hadn't much liked Stoker's dreary Gothic conspiracy, any more than they'd appreciated Sheridan Le Fanu's similar vampiric efforts years earlier. After decades of tall tales inspired by the perceived details of Dora's life, Dora resolved to keep their tale-telling tenants and house guests at arm's length. No, Dora truly had no idea how immortality had settled upon them. Immortality was not so dramatic as authors imagined, though. It was merely a matter of waking up one day and continuing to do so for the rest. It was filling the minutes, the hours, the days, the weeks, the months, the years, the decades, the centuries with observation, with a front row seat to the show. More often than not, their own face in an old film, their voice crackling on a scratched-up record, or their grin fading from a hospital's old staff photo pleasantly surprised them. Dora had been more than they even remembered at this point, and there was always more to be ahead. Contrary to the Penny Dreadfuls, the downsides of immortality were the garden variety torments that came with the spark of life in the first place. People died, people left, wives decomposed in much the same way as husbands, as children, as family, and Dora missed all of them. Yet they managed to grow a new heart for each friend and family member, knowing that they would fade, much as it always has been. Even the myth of immortals having to remain hidden didn't hold much water in reality. Humanity's memory, for better and worse, is short. It had been Dora's wife, Farah, who suggested the detective work. Dora's nose had crinkled behind the pages of the book they'd been reading. Crime was a tedious occupation that took years to shake, regardless of which so-called side one planted themselves on. Killer, cop, smuggler, pirate, thief, Dora's experience rendered them too skilled for any of these positions not to have unsavory folks chasing Dora over their skills for decades. Farah had shaken her head at this protest. You should investigate the stories, she had clarified. You love them so much, why not find where they're from? At the time, Farah's pitch for Dora's next occupation had seemed a little too academic, less detective work and more work for a scholar who was able to turn their hobby into an occupation without fostering resentment at the activity. So Dora chased the suggestion from Farah's lips with a kiss and assumed they would think little of it. But even when Dora forgot the name of the island Farah had grown up on, forgot her eye colour and the name of the perfume she pressed into the dark brown creases of her neck each morning, Dora didn't forget the suggestion to investigate. After all, if their own story had been watered down to devilish portraits and exaggerated into bloodthirsty vampires, what were the origins of other folklore, bedtime stories, and fairy tales? Who might they be? Dora abandoned their front row seat to seek a peep at the stage's foundations. Some stories were too old for this, of course. Some stories were echoes, teachings stretching back millennia, before even Dora's time. Those were not the stories Dora sought after, though, as much as they felt honoured to hear them. Dora grasped at much younger threads, at the tales of children tricked by witches and by wolves, transformed into fish and swans, cursed to live richer and poorer for the crimes of their greedy parents, the stories that no one could quite agree whence they came. Dora was not seeking evidence of magic. They were too old, too undying for such naive skepticism. It was strange, Dora had thought, however, in her search, that some stories were no longer told. Ones that they themselves had been told, heard passed down for generations, were disappearing and had even disappeared entirely. But it was an Armenian woman with wrinkles that curled her face into a permanent smile that first pointed Dora in the direction of the siblings. So many tales speak of them, of course, and you probably know them too. Hansel and Gretel, Jack and Jill, the two brothers, the ugly stepsisters, always two, always there. The old Armenian woman had told Dora she had known the siblings as a girl when they'd been her neighbours, living in a house they'd inherited under unsavoury circumstances that kept the townsfolk at bay. An old German man told Dora a similar childhood memory years later, as did a Colombian woman miles from either of them. It took almost a decade, but one night in a cafe in what was now called Prague, after years of pulling at frayed threads, Dora looked up from their notebook and was met with two sets of dark green eyes. Dora could tell from their clothes, nondescriptly fashionable, and the unhidden dark circles beneath their falsely young eyes that, like Dora, they were older than they looked. Dora closed their book. "Are you the thief?" the siblings asked in unison. Dora frowned. "No," they replied. "What thief?" The siblings exchanged a look without turning away from Dora and then asked, "What did you do with the missing tails?" Dora blinked. "You noticed them too?" she asked. For the first time, only one of them replied. The one to Dora's right answered, "You of all people should know, Dora, that absence is as loud as presence to those with time to listen." "I am not the thief," said Dora, eyes flicking between both of them. "The only thing I've taken is great pains to find you." "Why?" the siblings both replied. Dora grinned. "Would you like some coffee?" The siblings looked at one another, then to Dora, and nodded. As the evening staggered into midnight and rolled on to the dawn, the coffee cooled, and the siblings explained. They explained that certain stories were always told, in different languages, countries, and characters, yes, but the stories were always the same. As Dora had done, the siblings had even inspired many of them, and told a few themselves. Dora listened as they weaved together the threads that they'd been following for so long, saying very little until the sun rose, bringing with it mention of the thief. Someone, immortal like them, Dora supposed, had been stealing stories, altering them unforgivably, ensuring they were no longer told and forgotten. It was this, the siblings posited, that was remaking the world so unkindly. Dora laughed at that. The world boasted no such morality. It wasn't unkind or kind, it simply was. People were kind and unkind, not the world. But the siblings shook their heads. "When they forget their stories, they forget themselves," the pair chorused. "They forget each other, and we will too. After all," the siblings paused and then asked, "How did you find us?" The old Armenian woman and the countless others who led Dora to the siblings flashed across their mind, making them blush. Dora nodded. "So what do we do?" Dora asked. The siblings offered identically gentle smiles. "We keep telling the stories," the one to the left answered. "And find the thief," the other added. "Good luck, Dora." The siblings stood up to leave, plastic chairs scraping against the stone. "And if I find the thief?" Dora called after the siblings as they turned their backs. "We will find you," they said together, but not aloud. They spoke, they seemed, from somewhere in the back of Dora's mind. Dora would not see the siblings again for a long time, or what is a long time for most. The years marched forward, and Dora searched right to the edges of each, leaving fragments of their story behind wherever they went. You've probably heard some version of it. In some, Dora is a 1,000-year-old time traveler who saves worlds. In others, they are a soldier who has fought in every war for the last 3 centuries. They don't really like the ones where they're a melancholic mercenary very much, but the ones where they are a superhero doing deeds throughout the decades make them laugh. Because Dora's story meeting your ears can only mean that the thief didn't beat it there, and that Dora is still hot on the thief's tail. That's me.
Okay, thanks, Mariana. That was beautiful. So lovely. I'm just going to gush after everyone, so I need to stop myself. Okay, next up we have Jess Leighton. Jess Leighton invented writing, the airplane, and the internet. He was also the first person to reach the North Pole. Jess is a writer with art found in Junkie, Junkie, Kill Your Darlings, Voice Works, Envy Life, Archer, and scattered elsewhere. Jess has presented work at a variety of festivals around Australia, exploring fandom, identity, and genre fiction. Her short story, Chemical Expression, was published in Underdog, hashtag Love Oswaye Short Stories.
Hello! Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Jess Leighton. Thank you so much, Olivia, for introducing me. I am talking to you live tonight from Wurundjeri country in the Kulin Nation. So my piece I'm reading tonight is a little fairy tale I've created called Fins for Wings. And I regret calling it that because that is a hell of a tongue twister to say. All right, let's kick off. A long time ago, in a forest old and green, there was a bird. She had red feathers which shone gold in the sunlight, and her voice was as soft as the first light of dawn and pure as the fresh morning air. Every day she flew through the forest, finding berries and insects for food, strings and feathers and fur for her nest, and any shiny bits and pieces which happened to catch her eye. On a day like any other, the bird came across a small stream which fed a pool in the center of the forest. Swooping down to get a closer look, she caught a flash of something in the water. Curious, she landed by the edge of the pool and watched. A small fish was dancing in the water, the light shimmering from her silver and violet scales as she twirled, and the bird sat entranced as the little creature swam. Gathering her courage, the bird began to flit over the pool, mirroring the fish's movements. At first, the little fish seemed nervous about her presence, staying near the sandy bottom of the pool. But soon she grew bolder and more elaborate, darting towards the surface. She rippled the water with a flick of her tail. The bird followed, barely skimming the surface with her wings. The fish wove her way through reeds, the sun flashing on her scales as though the sunlight itself was dancing in the water. The bird zigzagged above. As the fish dove towards the bottom in a spiraling plunge, the bird swooped upwards, soaring towards the heavens. And so they danced, this strange pair, as though water and air were one. As the sun began to set, the bird landed near the edge of the pool. The fish followed her up into the shadows, and the two simply gazed at one another for a moment. With a heart full of ecstasy and wonder, the bird sang, her voice as golden as her feathers in the fading light. In that hidden moment between day and night, the forest hushed and listened to her song. And so, for a time, the days went by. The bird would fly to the pool and skim across the waters, the little fish rising up to greet her. She brought her fish friend insects and brightly coloured flowers, while her fish would offer her smooth stones and water snails. They would dance along the surface of the pool, the barrier which divided them, wing and fin nearly touching as they swooped and twirled. Every evening, as the sun would set, the little fish would sit in the shallows and listen as the bird sang. The rest of the forest watched the pair with confusion. One day, the flock came to the bird, chiding her for her foolishness. "Can a fish build a nest, sing a song beside you, fly with you through the sky?" they asked, ruffling up their feathers and chirping indignantly. "Befriend your own kind, share company with those who can share your song and your sky." The little bird did not listen to them, for her heart was never as full as when she sang to the fish in the hushed evenings. But she was still saddened to know that they would always be apart. One cool autumn evening, a witch entered the old green forest. This caused quite a stir amongst the animals, for this witch could speak in the tongues of human and beast. And so, as she went about whatever secret business she had, the forest creatures approached her with their troubles. They found that, for a price, the scarlet-robed witch would solve any of their problems. The scared of heights nestling gained the use of her wings and found courage. The hunted fox easily evaded the dogs, and the buck became the graceful doe. Hearing this, the friendship-sick bird took her most valued possession from its hiding place, a golden ring dropped from the careless hand of some traveller, and placed it by the leather-clad feet of the witch. The bird then sang for her of her request. Holding the ring between her thumb and forefinger, the witch thought for a moment. "Fins for wings," she mused out loud. "Never have I heard of such a thing." Seeing the bird's dejection, she smiled. "Nor did I say it was impossible. But it will be a challenge." She paused a moment more and then addressed the anxious bird. If the spell is to work, I must find a willing fish to change forms with you. Return to me tomorrow, and we will see if I have found what you need. Elated, the bird flew off to her nest and prepared herself. Finally, at the end of the day, she rested by the water and sang to the fish one last time. It was a song of longing and of expectation, of promises and wakened dreams. As she settled down in her nest that night, her heart was warm, knowing that tomorrow they could finally dance together without the barrier of worlds between them. In the dawning hours of the day, the bird flew to the meeting place and waited impatiently amongst the dew-covered leaves. By the time the witch strolled into the clearing, the eager bird was so nervous that she had almost begun to molt. The witch shook her head upon seeing the state the bird was in, her long plait slinking down her back. Calm yourself, little one, she said. These things take time and will not be sped by worrying. She sat upon a stump. I managed to find one willing to change places with you. The bird began to flutter and chirp with excitement, but the witch held up a cautioning hand. Before I do this, she said sternly, I must remind you of what you are doing. Once the spell takes effect, you will be bound to that stream for the rest of your life. You will be cut off from all others of your kind. The open air will be closed to you, and you will never fly again. Are you willing to accept this? The bird thought of her nest, of the sunlight on her wings as she flew, and the sound of her neighbours singing to greet the morning. Then she thought of the little fish, all silver and violet, dancing in the clear, cool water. She looked at the witch before her, and the witch saw her determination. Reaching into her pocket, the witch pulled out a little packet wrapped in gum leaves. She rubbed a strange substance on the bird's beak, wings, tail, and claws. It smelt of mint and sage. Tonight, as the last rays of sunlight are shining, plunge yourself into the creek. The transformation should be immediate, but, her voice deepened, under no circumstances must you enter the water before then or become wet. The witch rose and brushed the dirt off her scarlet robes. Striding away, she vanished into the forest. The bird flew over to the creek and perched on a nearby tree. She longed to swoop over the sparkling waters, but was too fearful of the witch's warning to risk it. Just come to say hello. But was too fearful of the witch's warning to risk it. From the water, the little fish seemed to peer anxiously at her, but all the bird could do was flap her golden wings and chirp loudly to her. As the sun began to set, the bird launched herself into the air and began to circle above the creek. Round and round she swept as the sun sunk lower and lower in the evening sky. Finally, as the last rays of sunlight shone, she dove downwards, plunging herself into the water. For a moment she was cold and wet. The next, she felt as though she were floating in the air. Opening her eyes, she looked around and saw the surface of the water above and the creek bed below her. Turning her head, she saw a faint golden flash. Red-orange scales covered her body, which now ended in a fish's tail. Delighted, the golden fish started through the water. Searching for the little silver fish, she searched for the reeds behind rocks. She swam upstream and downstream past many different fish who looked at her in astonishment. Eventually, as the moon was rising, the newly made fish swam discouragingly up to the shadows where she used to sing to her fish. Suddenly, she saw a flash of silver and violet overhead. She swam towards it excitedly until she realized that it had come from the sky, not the creek. Peering up at the creek bank, she saw a small bird with moonlight shining on her strange silver and violet feathers. This bird was watching her sadly. As she saw the little bird, the red-orange fish knew the truth. There was no other reason a fish would have agreed to exchange its fins for wings. She swam as close to the shoreline as she possibly could, and the silver bird flitted closer, so that all that divided them was the very surface of the water. Gently, the little fish lifted her head and began to sing. That's it for me tonight. Thank you so much, everyone.
So that nearly made me cry. Thanks, Jess. Next up, we have Cheryl Ho. Cheryl Ho is a Chinese Singaporean actor and director and... Oh, my goodness, Olivia, don't be in such a rush. Cheryl Ho is a Chinese Singaporean actor, maker, and director of special projects at Wave Studio. Her practice includes performance, writing, and vision. Her show, Getting Home, won 4 awards at Melbourne Fringe 2020: Best in Theatre, Best Emerging Writer, Best Emerging Producer, and the New Zealand Tour Ready Award. As part of Artwave Studio, Cheryl co-created a one-on-one audio work, A Call Away, which premiered in Singapore's Writers' Festival 2020. In 2021, a new interactive audio work, Note to Self, will be presented at Esplanade Flipside 2021. She is currently an associate artist with VIMH.
Hi everyone, I'm Cheryl and I'll be reading Let Her Sleep. When I was a baby, there were 3 little fairies who blessed me. Another was forgotten, she was mad, cursed me bad, my dad was sad. Merryweather, my favorite one, mutters some words her blessing done. Saved, but not completely, prick of a finger, I sleep for eternity. Till of course I am awakened by a man, a king's son, Prince Philip, tall, fair, and handsome. Now, wouldn't that be the dream? But nah, he isn't my type. I took a peek in my supposed slumber. Look, I don't know you, stranger. Get your filthy lips off me. Besides, I'm already seeing someone. I think we haven't really talked about it. Actually, Prince Philip, can you just leave me be? I'm tired, I'm exhausted, and hey, I'm pretty comfy. I'm a woman of 25 in her quarter-life crisis, and look, I think I've seen all that life is. Sleep sounds good, would be the dream. I wouldn't have to cook, floss, or clean. Oh, Philip, can you just leave me be? I've got more than enough coming at me. People say I've been asleep for 100 years, but if you look at my hours of deep REM sleep, I total it to 25 days, really. They exaggerate, and somehow I haven't aged. While we're here, and Philip has finally gone away, let's say, what if this king's son wasn't a king's son, was a regular man? I mean, aside from being an incredible performer, dancer, and friend, he's a hilarious bloke, a very disorganized, organized folk, the sweetest, most beautiful being, like the person I was sort of seeing. Let's call him Mr. Yentao. Mr. Yentao isn't a stranger. He was a gym buddy by day, a movie buddy by night, a call for help when I prick my finger because I have no idea how to stop the bleeding and I feel faint and it doesn't occur to me to go to the pharmacy, right? Nope, this prick is not to be confused with the one that eventually sends me to an eternal slumber. And while we're here and Philip has gone away and Mr. Yentao might be here to stay, I'm trying to find the thread where it could all work out. But even in my dreams, it gets caught. Clumps and knots, muddled thoughts. It sits, questions like stale water collected at the bottom of a pot. A breeding ground for mosquitoes, especially in Singapore, where I'm from. And they feed mercilessly, multiple pricks. Again, not to be mistaken for the one that eventually sends me to an eternal slumber, but could possibly give me dengue. And then the king's son returns. No, I'm not talking about Jesus, though that would be good, hey? But no, it's Prince Philip. Gosh, he's such a prick. Again, not to be mistaken for the one that eventually sends me to an eternal slumber, but gives me a bloody migraine and makes me sick. He proclaims, "Honey, what about me? I am the way." This is not how the story goes. Think of what people would say. You are unequally yoked. It can't be a union when you have differing opinions. I've read it in the books. Countries have had laws about it. Some still do. You don't mess with religion. You know it's true. Oh my gosh, Philip, really, just go. Find another story where you'll get a role. There are so many out there that fit your type. You'll get something eventually, believe me, all right? Though maybe he does have a point. So, while we're here and Philip has gone away, I'm not sure what Mr. Yentao will say. It's not so much the feelings, the thoughts, more so the questions that confuse me lots. Speaking in riddles of kids, of partners, of a future together with the other. Masquerading them as a joke with a glint in the eye, a hint of what could be we've just let pass us by. I confess there are things I've said that shaped the trajectory of this so-called relationship that was, quote, not good for me. Not fully giving, not fully receiving, but still it went on, so I kept believing. It's not so much of a prick this time, sort of a throbbing, a shoveling of my mind, creating a large hole for stories to fester. The fantasy that was stuck becomes a tale that unravels in the dark, replaying moments of reality, amplifying ones that seem like a fantasy, dreams where he plays a recurring role. How long does the season go for? She always loves to see him dance, so full of joy, fullness of expression from this wonderful boy. What do you want to do, says Mr. Yentao. Spend more time with you, she'd want to say, but it gets caught like a million other things in her heart. 'Cause in this story, there seems to be no happily ever after. The tangling of two souls never united because of religion, of faith, of a different race, of visas, goals, and uncertainty of place. He joked about being a muse for her writing, and here lies more truths than was ever spoken aloud. Because she grapples with it all through this non-fiction fiction, pulling her burning words out. Did that just lag? Was that fine? Should I continue? Okay, now, where did I stop? Oh, the audio was fine? Okay, I shall continue. She thinks, it's been told to me, I'll probably love you for the rest of my life. I'm not sure if that is sad or beautiful, not sure if it could be both. So it's time to wake up. No anticipation of a savior, no knight in shining armor, no tower to keep her at bay because she lived in an apartment where he can take the lift up and stay. Till a crisis hits and she's got a gig and they live in different states. She'd still see traces of him in skateboards, cinemas, Maccas, camera equipment at JB High Fives, 7-Eleven coffees amidst the nightlife. In songs she only knows through his grooves and beats, ones she's seen over and over again on his Instagram feed. In galleries, moving and inching closer, where she'd be looking over his shoulder, appreciating the art, but more so the moments in between. Holding on to memories, little traces, a little flip book from the museum she brings to different places. And maybe this is enough when the reality doesn't last. There is joy in this impermanence left in the past. Because at least in this world of eternal slumber, they existed. Moments of love, memories she'd keep, and maybe the story could continue, if only they could let her sleep. That's me. Thank you.
All right, Cheryl, that was so good. Thank you so much. Next up, Melanie Saywood is a proud descendant of the Bigambul and Waka Waka peoples. Her work has appeared in Kill Your Darlings, New Australian Fiction, and Overland. She has been shortlisted for the David Unapon Award 2018 and 2020, the Boundless Indigenous Writers Mentorship, and the Harlequin First Nations Fellowship.
Hi everyone, I'm Melanie and I'm coming to you from Tulma, which is in Ipswich in Queensland. And I'm going to read you a story called Jack and the Pumpkin Vine. 1. It takes hours to get to Auntie Mew's. The ute clatters over the road's corrugations, and I think of all the times we joked about the red rattler being held together by sticky tape and Nan's prayers. I mutter a few words to the ancestors and catch Pa's eye just as the ute's tyres dip into a pothole. Not far now, he calls over the rattling. I look up to see that the fields of sugarcane have given way to a tangle of bush either side of the road. And you're going to come every month, right? I ask. You'll be right, bub. 2. Auntie Mew is sitting in a recliner in the living room when we arrive. She's wearing a loose floral dress, her right arm fastened across her chest in a sling. She looks tiny in the big chair, all skin and brittle bones. I lean over to kiss her. She smells like sweat and dust and something sweet and slightly off. She stares and I squirm beneath her gaze. So you're my great niece Jacqueline who's going to come and look after me then? Jack, Auntie Mew. Everyone calls me Jack. She stares some more. Well, what you doing then, bub? Put the kettle on, eh? 3. Mew doesn't muck around, and after Pa leaves, she passes me a list of chores before going for a nap. I straighten the stack of magazines, do the dishes, and take the rubbish outside. After I'm done, I sit for a spell on the veranda steps and look out at Mew's ailing garden. The trees are burnt brown from the sun and the soil is choked with weeds, but it's nowhere near as bad as the garden at Christy and my place was in the beginning, and I managed to get a full veggie patch started there. I can do this, I think. 4. One afternoon, while Mew naps, I check the old shed for things that I can use in the garden. I find a stack of antique tools and gather them up. Just as I'm about to leave, I spot a jam jar full of pumpkin seeds right by the shed door. I frown. I'm sure they weren't there when I came in, but the light is dim inside and perhaps I'd fluked it and stepped over it without noticing. I shake aside a weird feeling and take the jar outside with my other treasures. And in the daylight, I pour some of the seeds out onto my hands and examine them. They're dry and a bit dark, probably mouldy, ancient, and past it. But I decide there's nothing to lose by trying, and I press the best ones into a neat patch of clear garden. I sprinkle them with water and wonder if I'll still be there by the time they start to fruit. 5. I'm on my hands and knees in the back bedroom sorting through 50 years worth of papers when I hear Mew scream from the veranda. I run outside, heart racing, expecting to see that she's taken another tumble, but she's leaning against the railing looking out in horror. I follow her gaze and see that the bare earth where I pressed the old seeds is now covered in tiny seedlings. Wow, that was quick. What have you done? She asks. Just gardening. I like fresh veggies and I'm good at gardening. She rests a firm hand on my shoulder and says, rip them out. But I can't make myself destroy them. 6. The next morning, the seedlings are mature vines with tiny green buds of flowers all pointing towards the morning sun, towards the house. When I look up at the veranda, Mew is watching. 7. One time back home, Christy accidentally turned our front lawn into a pumpkin patch. She'd swept the seeds from our Halloween jack-o'-lantern carving off the veranda. Without help, they grew roots, and by Christmas we had a vine started. We laughed as it took over, male flowers blooming. When the female flowers came along, we were sure they'd never be pollinated. We could, Christy said, do a little hand pollination. So we traipsed around the yard, picking the stamens out of the male flowers and rubbing them into the females, joking about how we were fingering the pumpkins. But this vine at Auntie Mew's is something altogether different. One day there were no flowers, the next there were hundreds. 2 days later, the vines have reached the bottom of the stairs. Cut them back, Mew says. But there are baby pumpkins on there, I say. They'll be food. I'm not eating them. 8. The night before Pa is due to arrive, I find a ripe pumpkin. It's a butternut with a slender oval top, rounded bottom, and creamy orange skin. Somehow I have missed it ripening from flower to baby fruit, and it has matured in less than 2 weeks. I take it inside and set it on a cutting board. I think about how this vine is behaving, creeping towards the house. I take a sharp knife and slice it in half, letting out a sigh of relief that, magical though the growth has been, it is just a normal pumpkin. I peel away the skin first, then chop the sweet-smelling flesh into pieces. When I get to the bulb, I start scooping out the pulp. It resists, and I pull a bit harder, gasping when I see that there are roots spiraling out of tiny seedlings and buried in the flesh of the fruit. I told you to cut them back. I jump. Mew is standing next to me, looking at the seeds on the board. Look it! I look down, and in front of my eyes, the rest of the seeds are shooting, small green seedlings unfurling from inside, roots growing. What the fuck? I brush them into my hands and shudder as I drop them into the rubbish bin, feeling their tendrils wrapping around my fingers. Too late to bin them, Mew says. Then what do I do? She reaches into the pocket of her dress and hands me a lighter. Into a pot and burn them, then outside and light it up. Auntie, it's December. I can't light a bonfire. We'll set the whole district on fire. But then I meet her gaze and I can see that she's serious. 9. By the time we've burned the seeds and made it outside, the other vines have climbed up the stairs and knotted themselves around the veranda rails. I try to pull them back, but the leaves are covered in fine spikes that embed themselves into my fingers. They pulse there under my skin, and I wonder if the vines will start sprouting from my body next. In the shed, Mew moves surprisingly quickly and emerges clutching a wicked-looking hacksaw in her good hand. You start cutting, I'll get the fire started. The idea of fire in this heat terrifies me. We won't be able to control it, and in my few months of grandparent-enforced penance will turn into real jail time. I glance around the shed and I spot an old paraffin flame gun. I flick the trigger a few times and the torch bursts to life. This will burn most of the vine from the bottom, I say. We'll still have to cut the ones off the veranda, but this might save the house. She nods and together we go to work. 10. It's not the first time it happened, she says when it's all over. I found the seeds in the shed, I say. Oh, she replies, I thought we'd gotten rid of them all back then. Where did they come from? Some white fella, she replies, lives over the ridge. He gave them to your uncle way back when. He was fishing for our land, as white fellas are prone to do. He pretended he was doing something nice. He just forgot to tell us that this gift would keep on growing till it had taken everything over. 11. I wake to the sound of a car rattling down the track towards the house. Pa, I think, and race outside. But when I get there, it's not Pa's old red rattler. It's a shiny yellow ute with Country Fire Association livery. A guy around my age jumps out of the cab. G'day, he says. I live over the ridge. I thought I saw a blaze here last night. Everything okay? There was no blaze, I say. I was just killing some weeds with the flame gun. He reaches down and picks up a leaf. Looks like a pumpkin to me. That's not a weed. Mew shuffles outside. Felix Giante, you get off this property right now, she calls. Having trouble with the pumpkins again, eh, Muriel? Got yourself a little helper who likes to garden, hey? His face twists into a grin. You should call me if you need help. You know pumpkin farming's been in my family for generations. Thank you. That was me.
Amazing, Melanie. Thank you so much. To finish us off this evening, our last story will be performed by Bryant Apolonio. Bryant Apolonio is a Filipino-Australian writer and lawyer. He grew up in Sydney and lives in Darwin. He won the Overland Fair Australia Prize for Fiction in 2017 and the Liminal Prize for Fiction in 2019. He's currently working on a collection of short stories.
Thanks, Olivia. I'm speaking from unceded Larrakia, and this story is called 1001 Kilometers. Last night, I was telling you about how we'd broken down. We were 3, maybe 4 hours east of the Stewart Highway when something in the engine made a sound like an old printer, and we couldn't accelerate past 60. We stepped out of the car and flipped the hood open, and then immediately exhausted our vehicular knowledge. The sun was setting, an ostentatious territory sunset, all orange and purple. We'd left town way too late. The brassy hum of insects growing louder. The termite mounds around us took on a grave-like aspect as night fell. I suggested that we tell each other stories to kill time. Real or made up, she asked. Either, I said. Once upon a time, she began, there lived a massive gronk who promised he'd pack the satellite phone for a 6-hour drive through the desert. He didn't. The thirst and exposure transformed him, as if by magic, into a corpse. Bones picked clean by whistling kites. The end. Yeah, I said. I said I was sorry. Then again, if she were up and ready by the time she said she would be, we'd have left on time and we wouldn't have to wait around till morning for someone to come along and help us. I could barely see her face in the dim light, but I could imagine it. For a while, we sat in silence, and then she spoke up. All right, I've got a funny one for you. It's a story about treasure and recurring dreams. Love it already, I said. So way back when I was a kid, I had these dreams about a house. It was always the same house. I can remember every detail. was a cream-colored Art Deco apartment block in Alexandria. It had a driveway lined with sliding garage doors, a massive shared yard with a hills hoist and lime trees. Limes were always bitter and grew no larger than marbles. She said that she knew in those dreams that buried under that lime tree in that exact Alexandrian complex was something very valuable. So she went and tried to look for it. Scoured the suburb on Street View and was amazed and kind of terrified to find that it actually existed. She arrived there one night with a shovel, cartoon crept past the bins into the yard, and there, amidst the bottle brush and the birds of paradise, she found a sickly old lime tree, and then she began to dig. Eventually, someone called the cops on her. She must have been, 15 then, and wasn't even allowed past midnight. The people living in those apartments were still up and about. They were eating dinner and watching TV. They were smoking over the railings. Kids played risky games of balcony handball. When the cops arrived, they confiscated her shovel, and then they gave her a lift home to a parental reckoning. If she promised not to come back there again, they wouldn't charge her. What were you digging for anyway? One of them asked in the car. No use lying now. She told them she dreamt about that house. She was looking for something. Like what? Buried treasure? The copper snorted. His partner chimed in. You know, I had a dream about a house last night too. A 70s red brick house, the low slung wall. There's a garden with a veggie patch, little tin shed, a compost bin. And under that shed, I knew there was a fat pile of cash and an early retirement. But listen, kid, I'm not going to go around digging up strangers' gardens because of something I dreamt up. That's why you're back there, the other cop said, and we're up here. She didn't speak the rest of the way home. Barely argued back when her parents passed her sentence. No parties, no phone, no friends for 6 months. The only thing she could think about was that red brick house the cop described. It was her own. The shed and the compost bin, she could see them right there through the kitchen window. The next morning, after her parents left for work, she began to dig again, and this time she found something. A suitcase, worm-eaten, leather-tattered, with hinges that had gone green with age. And she opened it. And I asked, what was in there? Nothing, she said. It was empty. Come on, I said. It's true, she said. No one had any idea how it got there. My parents thought it must have been buried before we moved in. Empty though, really? Who knows? Maybe I'll find a clue in another piece of luggage one day. Maybe I'm only just halfway down the chain of some great plan to find this hidden fortune. You dream of any houses recently? All right, you go now, she said. You tell me a story. I don't have any as good as yours, I said. Okay, hold on. I'll come up with one. You need a drink? I'm going to go refill my bottle. I stepped out of the car and into the warm evening. Then I rummaged around the boot and tried to think of a story. I grabbed a jerry can of water, or at least what I thought was water, and heaved it out. God, it was heavy. I remember straining to pull it, and it kept getting wedged in among our things. And then when I finally dislodged it and unscrewed the cap and tried to pour, nothing but sand came out. It was just fine sand. When I turned on a torch to get a better look, I realized it wasn't even our jerry can. It was covered in dust, paint smeared with a symbol kind of scratched on the side with a Stanley knife. I tried to empty it, but it didn't get any lighter. Then eventually she got out of the car too, and I could see her standing behind me watching. You all right? She asked. Before I could answer, there was a rumbling sound and the wind rose. It whipped the dirt up into dust devils, and I heard the rustle of panicked animals in the scrub. And then came the voice. Wayward travelers, it said, tell me how you wish to die. And when I looked up, I saw an enormous figure, a giant wreathed in fire towering above us. I was shitting myself, of course, frozen in place, unable to speak. We wish for a way home, actually, she shouted through cupped hands. Yellow eyes glared out through the sulfur smoke, and at that point, I swear to God, I felt my soul leave my body. 300 years ago, it said, I would have granted you your heart's deepest desire. 200 years ago, I would have made you the kings and queens of ancient lands. A century ago, I would have blessed you with riches. But I've been imprisoned for too long, trapped in there with the endless, maddening rattle of hire car junk, my only company. In that darkness, I made a vow. I would grant one wish to the ones who released me. I would ask them how they wanted to die, and then I would kill them that way. And what happens if I don't choose? I ventured. You think you can haggle with me like some back alley merchant? The spirit sneered. You think you can hedge and nitpick with a genie? If you make no choice, then I choose for you. I'll leave you here in the greatest labyrinth of all, where there are no walls or stairs to climb and only one dead end. Hold on, she whispered. I know this one. I know how this story goes. We can trick it. Let me do the talking. I blinked at her. What the hell was she on about? All of a sudden, she went, "Oh, Efreet," like fully playing along with it. "We submit to your will," she said, "but first grant us this last request. Give us a demonstration of your power. How is it that a being as great as you, whose forehead touches the stars, can fit in here, in a vessel so small?" And now she held up the jerry can and shook it in the air. "Show us the extent of your power, and we'll submit willingly." For a while, the spirit said nothing, but it couldn't resist a good pact. "Very well," it said. "Behold." Now the wind picked up again and sand blew everywhere. And when it stopped and I opened my eyes, the genie or the spirit or Efreet or whatever it was gone. And she was stoppering the jerry can with a plastic lid. She let it drop on the ground with a thud. A faint voice called out to us from inside now. A plaintive voice, almost drowned out by the screech of frightened cockatoos. "Show mercy," the voice begged. "Release me. I'll give you anything. My treasure, all of it." "Why should we trust you?" I said. "Perhaps once you hear my wretched tale, you'll understand why I acted the way I did." "Why not?" I said. "We had all night." "Long, long ago, the Efreet began in the court of King Solomon." But hold on, I'm running out of time. It's an incredible story, and I want to tell you the rest, but you'll have to wait until tomorrow night to hear it. That's my story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bryant. That was incredible. Wow. That was our last story. I don't know about you, but I was inspired and fired up, which in my opinion is what a good bedtime story should do. Some parents might disagree. I don't know. But what a wonderful bunch of stories and storytellers. Thank you everyone for sharing your work, and thank you for joining us on the other side of the screen. It's been wonderful, and I hope you feel ready for some sweet, fantastical, kind of creepy dreams. Thank you so much.